I saw the mention of aiming for 70% of converted cropland as forage farming in the course notes and elsewhere. I wonder, is that a golden rule of some kind? Are we trying to achieve this in every design? Can you elaborate on what we're trying to do here? Why 70% and when this number applies? Well, for human settlement to be truly sustainable, we kind of need about 70 to 80% in some kind of forest cover, and that forest cover can have very, very diverse productive uses over time, but not necessarily harvested all at once, continuously harvested. Now that sort of knowledge comes with heritage. You're passed on from generation to generation because of the longevity of forest. It's a very long-living system and is continuously perpetual if we actually manage it the right way. So you're never out of forest, you're always managing a forest and harvesting from a forest at a continuous rate. So it's never stopping. Now, to gain stability, if you look at the sustainable systems of Earth, there are massive areas in rangeland management where very few people have very large areas of land and herds of animals, but it's kind of a baronial permanence. And it doesn't help many people. It's just one or two people over a very large area. And then if you look at the ancient systems of China, Japan, and Korea, in a century or two ago, you had a grain culture of servitude. It was organic, but it was a massive amount of slavery, almost labor, where there was huge amounts of organic matter continuously toiled and turned around. All the sewage systems, all the animal waste systems, all the surplus product, all the surplus organic matter was continuously toiled back into a grain culture, mostly rice, right? Which was sustainable, but made the people slaves, and you end up in a bloody revolution like that. So if you look at the broad systems that have been sustainable over time, the only one that is truly sustainable is the forest systems, where people lived in forest settlements where 70 to 80% of the land was some sort of forest. Now, if you look at the intricate farming systems, and there aren't many that are truly sustainable out there, you can look at the ahupua'a systems of the Hawaiians. That was a sustainable system managed by people, but it was managed around water catchment exactly. And a lot of it was steep volcanic slopes, which are very steep because the angle of repose of volcanic ash. Now, when you analyze how much forest was in there, it was a considerable amount of forest, at least 70%. And the steeper top slopes were always sacred forest. And then your long-term forestry was below that, even with fuel woods, like the kukui nut, the candle nut was their fuel. And then the food forest, mixed forestry underneath that. And then it went into very specifically managed wet paddy type taro fields before it got to the village, before it got to the tsunami belt. So there was a protection from tsunami on the foreshore. So there were often catchments to foreshore in the Hawaiian Islands. And then you get the chinampa systems of Mexico and parts of Asia, which are canals and water, canals and land-based. So a 50% land, 50% water, with trellises over the canals and good forestry systems as well as crops on the land base. There was an enormous amount of vegetative cover. The whole thing was vegetated, and a lot of forests and a lot of aquatic system at the same time. So it was the most productive system ever documented, most productive sustainable system ever documented, the chinampa system. And we can put the ahupua'a type system as for steep slopes. We can use that type of thinking. We can use a chinampa system for and in part of our design, we can do chinampa-esque type systems. Then when you look at the date palm overstory of the Middle East and North Africa, they were dry land systems, arid landscape, but an overstory of palm trees with up to 13 different fruit trees underneath and very small clearings, only a quarter to half an acre, 2,000 to 1,000 to 2,000 square meters, very small clearings with a real dry land productive forest around them, way more than 70% forest, and mostly productive forest. And there would have been steeper sections that weren't so productive. Then you've got the swid and burn systems of the tropics. Now you're in the tropics, 2 acre clearing for production, but it was abandoned for 10 to 15 years when it regrew. And these were literally in the wild forests, in the tropical forest. They're out there as examples, all of these. So you've got way more than 70% there. Now the fruit trees were grown on the walk from the village out to the gardens, and there were multiple gardens out along the walks from the village, and you didn't return to a main crop garden for 1 to 2 years. It's called the swid and burn system. And then you have the cork and pork forests of Portugal and Europe. Fantastic systems of temperate climate forests. So that's where it all comes from.